I'm going to start off by asking you all a question. And my question to you is this. When you left Lee's Ferry, do you remember what the rangers told you the river was running at?
Yes.
10.
It's running at about 10,000. 10,000 cubic feet per second. That's the volume of water that Glen Canyon Dam is releasing, and that's the amount of water that is being allowed to pass through Grand Canyon. And when I started thinking about the Colorado River, when I started thinking about the river fluctuations, what I had to do to make it really simple was I had to think about what a cubic foot was first. And when I think of what a cubic foot is, 1 cubic foot. That's about the volume. And so when I think of 10,000 cubic feet, I think of 10,000 basketballs. And imagine 10,000 basketballs full of water. So when they say 10,000 cubic feet per second, what they mean is if I put my hand out and in 1 second, 10,000 basketballs full of water are going to pass me by. So we're talking about the volume. So in 3 seconds, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 30,000 cubic feet of water is going to pass by. And when we get into why, the reason why I'm getting down to that kind of detail is that has everything to do with the reason why we are actually doing this archaeological thing. Grand Canyon became a national park in 1919, and they installed a USGS gauging station down at Phantom Ranch. And that gauging station can actually measure the volume of water passing through. And it's been measuring water since the early 1920s. So, pre-dam, so the Glen Canyon Dam was finished in 1964, and so from the 1920s to 1964, we have a lot of data about what the river was doing. And would anyone in this group like to guess how low the Colorado River was recorded on that gauging station?
800. 800.
Okay. It was about 700. Wow. And to keep this program easy, I'm going to round it to 1,000 for. If any of you guys are scientists, you don't like 1,000, I'm sorry, but it makes it so much easier for the non-scientists. Imagine the river running at 1/10 of what it's running right now. Okay, so that river was very different then. Would anyone here like to guess what the river was flowing at the highest? What was the highest on record?
150.
Okay, more than that.
250,000.
Okay, about that. So more than 200,000 cubic feet per second. So the gauging station also is, because we have all this data, they can have this nice average. And they're saying that the average high flow was at about 100,000 cubic feet per second. And so why is it? Why would a river fluctuate between 1,000 cubic feet per second to on average 100,000 cubic feet per second? And that has everything to do with how special every single river is. This particular river starts in the Colorado Rockies. Has anybody ever been to Rocky Mountain National Park?
Yeah.
Yep.
Ooh, beautiful place. That's where the Colorado River starts. So all winter long, that area is receiving snow. And that snow is actually blocking up that precipitation. And the Colorado River is actually, most of the water that goes through is actually snow melt. So in the wintertime when it's snowing and that water is being locked up in snow, that river is going to run at about 1,000 cubic feet per second. But in the spring, you know what? That river was carrying sediments. It was rich in sediments. It was carrying sand. It was carrying silt. It was carrying mud. And those sediments would actually scour these beaches clean. So if we were standing here pre-dam, this vegetation wouldn't be here. The river would just be scoured. This area would be scoured clean. And in time, when the river, in the summertime, when it would go back to its regular channel, this area would just be left with sediments. And yeah, plants would grow up, but that following winter, they'd probably be scoured away again. The reason why I'm talking so much about this river fluctuation has so much to do with why people lived here, and it's so much of the reason why we're actually doing this archaeological site. So, we haven't talked about the people yet. We're talking about the river. What I'd like to do now is to actually start going up to the archaeological site, and we can talk 100,000. Do you think you'd be underwater here?
Yes.
Yeah. Vegetation really hasn't changed. Okay, turn around and look at this vegetation. Do you know what those plants are? They're mesquite trees. What we know about the natural history of a mesquite tree is that they're drought resistant. They don't need to live in a floodplain. They have really long tap roots that can go deep into the water and get watered that way. Yeah, they have roots that can take advantage of surface floods, but they don't need to be living down here. So, on average, when that river was running at about 100,000 cubic feet per second, it was probably flowing here, but not up there. So we use the mesquite tree as an indicator. We call it the old high water zone. So that's indicating how high the river would get in these spring runoffs. Now imagine when those spring runoffs slow down, the river's going to return to its channel, and we're going to be left with all these sediments down here. And those sediments are going to dry out, and the wind is going to pick up, and that wind is going to blow it up the hill, and that's how we get these beautiful sand dunes. Now, the reason why we're doing this archaeological dig is because of Glen Canyon Dam. Glen Canyon Dam is preventing sediments from being delivered on a yearly basis. So we're no longer getting those fresh sediments, they're not drying out, and they're not blowing up the hill anymore. Now, Grand Canyon is a national park, and the law mandates, it requires that the way that we treat archaeological sites in our national parks is that we preserve them in place. And what that means is you don't excavate them. You let nature take its course, and so the Grand Canyon has been doing the job of the National Park Service ever since time. What's happening is these hills are covered in archaeological sites, and the sand dunes, as they've been blowing up over the last few hundred years, has actually been preserving these archaeological sites in place. However, because we're not getting those sediments on a yearly basis anymore, these hills are actually eroding away and they're forming gullies. So why don't we go on up? When it rains hard and fast, that water the ground gets saturated really fast, and then once the ground becomes saturated, that water has nowhere to go but down, and so the water is actually following the path of least resistance through this area, and it's creating all this erosion. So what's happening is that this area, all this sand, all this silt's being washed away, and it's exposing archaeological artifacts. And so when we talk about being a national park, well, what happened was they did a survey of just the river corridor, and they found about 475 archaeological sites from Glen Canyon Dam all the way to the end of Grand Canyon. And they ranked these archaeological sites. Some of them were being protected by erosion, and some were eroding away. And it's the sites that are eroding away that they're actually doing these archaeological digs. So when the archaeologists got here, they looked at this hill, and what they saw is pottery sherds coming out of the ground. Do you see these kind of like red rocks that are kind of just laying around? Like, I've been using the word paver to describe them because they're those nice, flat, thin rocks. Well, those don't really belong in a sand dune, so they know that people actually brought them here. So when they did this survey, they looked in here, they saw a bunch of burned areas right here, and so they knew that this was going to be an archaeological site, so they slated it for excavation. This isn't a midden. What they do think right now, and they're still at the speculations phase of this, is that it's probably a floor. And when you look at that burned area, do you see those circles? Those were probably a burned roof. Okay. Now we've got two types of scientists working at this actual site. We've got geologists, geomorphologists, and we also have the archaeologists. And they're working together, and what they're trying to do is piece together the environment of what it was like back in the day when people lived here. So the fella down there in the hole right now.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, fella.
All right, we're running out of time, so I'm trying to keep my nose down here. Please do it.
So he's one of the geologists. He's a geomorphologist, and what he is doing is he's actually trying to date the sediments. When you look into that vertical wall, what you're going to see is a really changing fluctuation. You'll see different colors, and sometimes those different colors are going to indicate possibly a different type of system that was moving in here. So sometimes the river actually did flow this high. Sometimes wind is going to blow this in. And what the geomorphologists are trying to do is to kind of date when these example of a burned log back with them. So this was a survey done years ago, and they actually took that wood to a lab, and they were actually able to date it by carbon dating, and they dated those logs to 300 AD. Okay, so they're 1,700 years old. So the people that were actually living here at that time were the basket makers. So they were pre-Puebloan people. Okay, these people were not farmers. These people were hunter and gatherers, and they didn't really live in a fixed place. And so when they talk about the housing structures of people from that time, they're more ephemeral. They're not going to last that long. Now, the pottery shards that I have, they're going to indicate a whole nother culture that came at a much later time. And I'm going to pass some around.